Welcome back everyone to our second Alumni Matters video, in which we'll be chatting to several alumni and learning more about their careers, their thoughts on some of the key challenges our world is facing, and discovering how they're helping to shape it into a healthier, fairer and greener place. My name is Megan Meyer, Alumni Communications Officer at the University of Exeter, and today we're joined by alumnus Dan Crockett. He studied geography at Exeter, graduating in 2002, and now works as the Director of Ocean and Climate at the Blue Marine Foundation. With COP28 taking place later this month and the growing need to consider our impact on the planet and how we're looking after the natural world, we are delighted to be able to chat to him today about his work in this area. So thank you so much for joining us, Dan, and welcome.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you with us today. So I kind of guess the first thing that I would love to ask is, what drew you to working in the area of ocean conservation?
I've had a lifelong relationship with the sea. I guess, like many children, some of my happiest memories of when I was a child were spending time in the sea. You know, my mum taught me how to swim in the sea. And my father sailed around the world for about 15 years in the 60s and early 70s. And so I was sort of brought up with the idea of the sea being quite present in my family. And although where I grew up on the east coast of England in Suffolk, the sea is, you know, quite brown and not, not what you conventionally associate with a kind of a beautiful seascape. I was, you know, the time I spent there in the sea and around the sea was some of the kind of happiest formative memories of my life. So I've always loved the sea, and I started surfing when I was a child, and I'm still surfing now 30 something years later. And I really, surfing has been a big part of my life. I guess over the years doing it, I became more and more interested in all of the things that surround waves, you know, the different creatures, the different ecosystems, different habitats, and naturally started spending more time underwater, firstly as a scuba diver, and then in the last 4 or 5 years more as a free diver, and just became really interested in all of the small things that go around the surfing experience that I'd taken for granted before. And it became a real focal point. I lived up in the Orkney Islands off the north coast of Scotland temporarily, and I was free diving there and really realized how abundant the marine life was up there, how big the fish were and how many fish there were and how many seals there were and how happy and kind of healthy they looked, and really realized that what I'd been looking at in other parts of the UK for years was an ecosystem stripped of life. And really, you know, I sort of from that point forth, I knew that I really wanted to work in conservation. I didn't really know how one would work in conservation, and that took several more years of wanting to before I actually, you know, found an organisation I could work with. But yeah, it was a you know, it's probably an inevitability really, that at some point I'd work on something very closely connected to the sea.
Yeah, it almost seems like when you've loved something for that long, naturally it's going to show up in some way in your life, and yeah, a real privilege, I guess, professionally, to then be sort of leading the charge a bit on being able to create those memories for future generations by looking after our seas and improving them. So Blue Marine Foundation is where you work. Could you tell me and our lovely listeners a bit more about what that organisation is, and also what you do there in your role as Director of Ocean and Climate?
So Blue Marine Foundation was set up almost 15 years ago. I think it's 14 years ago now. And it was born off the back of a book called The End of the Line, which was turned into a documentary film. And it really helped draw the public's attention to a lot of the challenges that the ocean faces. Fundamentally overfishing, but a lot of other challenges besides. And the originators of that story, the journalist Charles Clover, and 2 of the producers on the film, Chris Gorrell-Barnes and George Duffield, were always being asked at screenings of the film, you know, okay, what are you going to do about it? And they set up Blue in response to that. And, you know, we exist to protect and restore a healthy ocean. We have the long-term aim of protecting at least 30% of the ocean by 2030 and ensuring that that protection is effective. We have other pillars focused on restoration of marine habitats, things like seagrass and salt marsh, and also species like oysters. We also promote sustainable fishing, and where necessary, we fight unsustainable practices, things like deep sea mining, things like over extraction, and we spend some time connecting people to the sea as well. We see education as a key pillar and a way to make conservation sustainable, to make it stick around. We're active in over 40 projects around the world.
Wow. That'll definitely keep you busy.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's something that I guess, this field of work, conservation, is shared between all of the network of people I know who work on it. We have a lifetime's work ahead of us. And some of the challenges are so vast in their extent that we're certainly not going to be out of jobs anytime soon.
Yeah, which I guess is reassuring from a personal point of view, but from a planet point of view, slightly daunting, the challenges that are ahead with that.
Yeah, totally. It is daunting. I mean, I think that the ocean it's very hard for people to see. Many people identify with it very strongly, but for most people, it's functionally invisible in their daily life. And so a lot of the challenges that it faces are quite hard for people to understand. And actually, that's one of the key reasons why a lot of bad practice goes on, is because people just don't even realize that it's happening.
But it must be a really delicate balance for you in the work that you do, of then looking at people whose livelihoods are based on the sea, but then also conserving the species that we have within it as well, related to overfishing, and sort of building up those populations and educating people. A lot of strands of work to bring together. Yeah,
and there's the fundamental tension that over 1 billion people on this planet rely on seafood as their sole form of protein, and that's not easily replaceable, and possibly shouldn't be replaced in lots of instances. The Marine Foundation very much sees itself as a friend of small-scale, artisanal, sustainable fishing, where it's applied correctly and done a good way. And that's an easy thing to say, but in reality, is a complicated thing to be involved in, and that is always an underlying friction. I think for me, it's the projects that are good for people and good for nature that win. And sometimes the two things are irreconcilable, and you have to sacrifice. I'd only look to promote projects that you would have to sacrifice profit in order to sustainably conserve the marine environment. I think that it's easy to say, this area should be protected, but I think all protection should be co-designed with local communities and with the needs of local communities in mind. With all of those challenges, I guess we've also got COP28 sort of taking place, and a lot of these discussions happening on quite a big scale, as well as, like you say, those local communities and those different things. And I just was sort of curious of, within your line of work, and particularly with oceans, what do you consider some of the key challenges that we're facing at the moment? And do you have any sort of suggestions on how to tackle them? Yeah, I mean, so the ocean climate conversation is a really interesting one. I mean, it's acknowledged that the ocean is a very valuable solution to the climate change. The marine ecosystems, blue carbon ecosystems, things like mangroves and salt marshes, have a huge role to play in the mitigation of the negative effects of climate change, and also adaptation to climate change. It's very clearly shown that on islands, communities who live inside a mangrove forest are obviously more resilient to extreme weather events and that sort of thing. It's been really interesting witnessing the kind of the presence of the ocean within the Conference of the Parties, within the climate change negotiations, which are happening this year for the 28th time in Dubai. I think I'm not a seasoned climate campaigner. I'm an oceans person through and through, and I can only comment on what I've seen, but I've actually seen a very rapid growth in attention and focus on the ocean within the climate change process in the last 3 years. You know, the ocean wasn't even part of the permanent text or part of the dialogue. Now, what does that mean that it's part of the dialogue? It means that every year the world's governments discuss the ocean as a topic. It has a permanent home in the text. There's the onus is on, and the pressure is on for the world's governments to build the ocean into their commitments when it comes to climate. And they can do that in a range of different ways, primarily through their nationally determined contributions. And we've seen a huge number of countries in the last few years and growing add the ocean into their nationally determined contributions. And that's really important for the ocean. You know, last year, for the first time, Blue Marine Foundation were a partner in it. There was an ocean pavilion within the COP process. And again, you know, what does that actually mean? What it means is there's a dedicated place for 2 weeks where ostensibly decision makers come together with people like NGOs, and there's an opportunity to, you know, shape solutions and to work together to collaborate on solutions to some of the challenges that the ocean faces. And I'm actually quite heartened by the presence of the ocean within the COP process. I think it's you know, exciting, and there's potential through that dialogue and through the establishment of those conversations to bring about, you know, real systemic change at the level that we need to fix some of these challenges. And then there's a whole nother treaty process, which is the Conference on Biological Diversity, at which last year it was agreed among the countries of the world that the targets of protecting 30% of land and water would be adhered to, and that was a very key moment for the ocean. You know, it's key that the ocean is in that commitment. And while the detail is what's really important, it's how effective that conservation is and how well it's done and how well it's then managed and how it is functional on an ongoing basis. That's all the really important bit. Still, these big global targets and these commitments and this progression towards protection is incredibly important. And you know, I chat to friends, you know, I quite often people are like, why do you even go to these, you know, these big global things? It always seems so rubbish from the outside, but actually it overlooks the fact that it's a group of very concerted people pushing very hard against and sometimes with the people who make, you know, the big global decisions on these topics. And it's very important that the ocean has a voice in those conversations, I think.
Definitely, because it covers so much of our planet and we rely on it in so many ways. And I also guess that on that sort of global scale, our oceans connect so many different parts of the world. So we sort of need to be having it at that level because everyone can be playing a part with what each of their own countries are doing. Yeah, which is, like you say, a massive task, but we're definitely making progress by like having oceans recognized within COP.
Well, and that kind of connectivity, I guess, what we've seen in the last few years, what I'm incredibly excited about is these transboundary marine protected areas, and they're multilateral agreements between two, sometimes more, governments to protect regions for their ecological significance rather than just based on country borders. So in Glasgow, we saw a number of Central and South American countries come together and announce the Eastern Tropical Pacific Marine Corridor, which is one of the biggest pieces of conservation in history. You know, it spans 5 different countries and goes across all of their waters. That is the benefit of these sort of big multilateral events, because you can't really make stuff like that happen without them. And I would hope and you know, genuinely think that we probably will see more and more of those big kind of big commitments from countries that are based on ecology rather than simply geopolitical borders. And I would love to see that ambition reflected back in some of the decisions made closer to home.
Definitely. And we've kind of spoken a bit, I guess, about with COP, that sort of global outlook that we're having. And then on your level with the Blue Marine Foundation, what you as an organisation are doing. I'm kind of interested for any of our alumni or supporters that are listening or watching today, who are thinking, wow, I love the ocean, I grew up near it, or it's really important to me, or I'm really concerned about what's going to happen. How can they, on that sort of individual level, do you think, help with tackling that environmental crisis and looking after our oceans so they're there for us to enjoy, for species to grow, for future generations, all of that good stuff that we'd really like to do? How can people help?
I think what we've seen in the last few years is a bit of a shift in public consciousness. I think the human connection with the kind of horrible and very visually evident plastic pollution crisis, has really helped people. And I think we're seeing the continuity of that in the current, reaction to water quality. I also sit on the board of Surfers Against Sewage, a NGO based down here in Cornwall where I live, and those things have happened because the public is starting to care about the ocean. I think anyone listening to this, who is interested in these topics, I'd really urge them to get involved. You could build that into your daily life, I guess, in the choices of seafood you can consume, the role you play in your local area. I mean, there's fantastic volunteer opportunities. I'd urge people to find who those people are in their local area. I guess also, we need to push hard to make sure that these things become priority. For instance, the deep sea mining conversation that's ongoing at the moment. The world runs a real risk of deep sea mining happening in the next year, and politicians, our politicians, other politicians around the world are only really able to have their policy positions on it because the public isn't demanding that we don't do it. So I guess I wouldn't underestimate your ability as an individual to bring about change.
Yeah, and I think it's important on looking at it at all those levels, isn't it? Because the ocean is a really big body of water, but it's also made up of a lot of water droplets. So if all of us can be doing something, if organizations like yours are also lobbying and creating change, and then we're also having these global conversations, hopefully all of that can be creating a bluer future as well, where we get to continue to go out and surf and enjoy and not have really horrible quality of water, and also there's nice fish to see.
I guess some of your viewers will be familiar with shifting environmental baselines, that concept, which is where you basically accept your environment as you see it and you've experienced it. And in the marine environment, it's doubly complicated because so few people see it regularly. But yeah, it is something that is changing all the time, and the more we can do to fight for the biodiversity within it, which doesn't really have a voice on land, the better, I think.
Definitely. And the question I guess I kind of just wanted to end on would be kind of like, what is one of your defining ocean memories for people who maybe don't live near an ocean or haven't got access to it? Like, what's one of the things that's stuck with you?
I think there's many that go back a long time. Even just on my birthday this year, I spent a lovely hour with an octopus. I guess the most mind-blowing kind of experience, we are actively involved in a project in Baja in the Sea of Cortez, which Jacques Cousteau called the aquarium of the world. And going there and seeing the abundance of creatures and the megafauna and understanding, what a healthy marine ecosystem looks like has been quite profound for me. And yeah, I'm very glad and lucky to have seen it, I feel.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today and speak and share about your work and the things that we can be doing in this area. It's been really great, and I hope everyone has enjoyed watching and listening. And we'll keep your eyes peeled on our website and our socials for our next Alumni Matters video, which will be launching in early 2024. So thank you very much for joining us today, Dan.
Thanks so much, Megan.